Thank you very much, Rem. If you had sat at the AA, as I did, listening to Rem in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, you wouldn't be surprised at tonight's talk. Thinking a little bit outside what you would normally come to as an architectural lecture. I think we saw CCTV in one small corner of one photograph, and that was about, well, there were other things, but I was writing notes, so I didn't see. Rem may have not shown a great deal of his work tonight. And I'd just like to talk about it a little bit, because I love his architecture. I think it's very important, and it always has ideas behind it and to one side. And I do think it, in a way, it does thrive on this mixture of programming many things into a reticent background. So that symbolic shot that he ended with, of maybe hyper-Cartesian rationality combined with what he characterized as a whimsical building by Anish Kapoor and Cecil Bellman and Catherine Findlay, which I think, I may be alone in thinking I've never met anyone else who loves it, but I like it. Anyway, I wonder if you would talk, now that the slides are off, Rem, would you talk about your architecture a bit?
What do you want to? What do you want to? Which aspect do you want to discuss?
For instance, I've just been in the new court, the Rothschild building, and I found that it was very Misesian in a way, and I'm not a great fan of Mies, but I liked your building a lot, and I liked the way you play off the grid and the abstraction. And the transparency, and perform the city, and also perform the Rothschilds family and that space. I mean, as you said, it's a hyperdense space and inward in many ways. And it's, the architecture is not maybe, first of all, it made me laugh, the building, a lot. Like all your work, it makes me laugh, maybe for the wrong reasons. I laughed at your elevators, which reminded me exactly of the Seagram building. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't supposed to laugh at that, but they're very visually arresting and quite upsetting if you can't focus on them because they're vibrating. And I know that Claire Booth Luce in the 1950s couldn't go in the Seagram building because she was under arsenic poisoning, and because of the vibration of the elevator core, she got sick and had to leave. And that reminded me of that. I'm sure it was not a reference in your building, but I loved the way it has, you see the Rothschilds, you see paintings of the Rothschilds, turns the Rothschilds inside out, and does it with humor and wit, and it performs the city. And, it always, well, I find to be convinced by something at first, when I saw it as drawings, I wasn't convinced at. I thought it was awkward and slightly understated. I was convinced you were right, and I just wish you would talk about it. Maybe.
I mean, one thing is that recently our whole thrust has been, of course, in different countries, and particularly in the East, and that is partly by default and partly by design, but more by default, I think. So it was an incredibly kind of rare and beautiful moment to do something in the city. In the city I knew as well as I knew London. And it has taken me more than 30 years to actually like London. So it's a love for a city that developed very, very slowly, and I think that was also good. So that when I started the whole effort, it was really an incredible concentration of separate themes that had been going on for a long time. The interesting thing about London is that everything, that there aren't barely any laws, that everything is a matter of negotiation. So in the city particularly, I could negotiate the ultimate shape, the ultimate argument, and the size of the entire building with the city architect, and that in itself was a very English and beautiful moment, because almost no other city allows so many kind of freedoms and is therefore so personal. What was also interesting is that in a typical contemporary condition, the building had to be at the same time a building for the Rothschilds, but maybe if they didn't really want it, it would have to be a commercial building. So we started like a commercial building and always hoped that it would eventually be the Rothschild building, but it was not clear from the beginning. So that as their interest mounted, suddenly we had to kind of convert a generic building into a kind of bespoke building, and I think you still see some of those two sides in the building, and I actually like that very much because it means there is a kind of almost classical dedication to a single company, but also a very contemporary how shall I say it, economy of values.
It's a very symbolic building in a way, the way it uses the background to perform the foregrounds that you pick out. Unlike, say, a Miesian building, which maybe I'm wrong, maybe Mies does it in its own way too by having an understated background. Doha and your first ambition. It's amazing. How Algeciras and Doha picked up all the BBC announcers, broadcasters who were over 42 and whose hair was going white. And they hired them as a whole and became almost overnight the best international broadcaster. So the whole BBC was bought. And you find, I think, as a method that this often happens in the Middle East, happens in China, where the West produces an incredibly high-level product and then is bought en masse and moved there. I admire politically what they're doing, too, in many ways. You hinted at it, but would you just say a little bit more about that rich, you said they pull it together as a whole and they think on all these levels. It does take, of course, a royal family with incredible power, centralized power, to pull all that together, doesn't it?
Well, I think that the way you describe it is kind of probably typical of the way we constantly underestimate the kind of intelligence of those environments, because we say that they bought the best people from the BBC and became the best thing, but actually there is a Arabic section of Al Jazeera, which is obviously the more important section because we see the English-speaking version, but the really politically active and politically efficient section is completely Arabic. And so I think that there is a little bit too simplistic to say that things are bought, because in the buying something happens, and I would say that kind of the same is true of CCTV. In the buying something happens that is no longer buying, but of course, when we are in this situation, we do not deliver or even conceive the things that we would conceive here. We conceive things differently, we conceive different things, and we, in those conceptions, we develop different ambitions. So I think it's much more, it's not an import, but that's why I wanted to emphasize this aspect of architecture as collaboration. I genuinely feel that in each of the operations that we're doing, we have so many conversations. So we also invest in those conversations. So obviously, on so many levels, we are so open and inviting of criticism. We are so precise in responding to criticism that I would say that whether it is a broadcasting building, a cultural building, it really is much more than simply buying or an import.
Right.
Sorry for this humorless kind of answer, but it really is crucial sometimes to really say it. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you for both answers. Let me open the questions to the floor. And I think we have a traveling mic on both sides. There's one here in the third row. Abe Hayam. Abe. And here.
Hello, yes, it's Abe Hayim. Fascinating talk, and I'm glad that you concentrated on issues and the mapping of the world, the various engagements of culture and democracies, and I found that fascinating. In that same sense of mapping, what would be interesting is, at the moment architects are building all over the world, and often in some very controversial areas, places with dictatorships, democracies. What would be interesting would be to combine one of your maps, map out where, architects are building in sort of controversial areas, and looking at the sort of ethical and political aspects of whether, architects should really build there. That would be an interesting map to see, and wondered what your view is on, for instance, building in, a country like China, which has just changed its, leadership, which, with the black-suited men, coming out of the chamber after, replacing the previous ones, looked like a group of godfathers, which had taken over from the previous lot. And for instance, the RIBA has opened a chapter in Hong Kong. And of course, there are lots of questions on, the question of building in Israel with all the war crimes and illegal settlements. So I'd like to have your view on that.
Well, I think the fact that we built in China shows at least that one of your questions we responded to in a positive manner. And I'm kind of interested in responding to you. One of the reasons we started AMO is that architectural practice, on the one hand, is kind of unbelievably exciting at this moment because theoretically the entire world is accessible to some extent to architecture. But at the same time, all the issues that you talk about are very present. And sometimes you cannot even generalize for a particular country because the conditions in that country are also very different. So the situation became so complex that we felt we needed in our office a kind of research section that would explore conditions over the world before we actually were active in them as architects. And so for that reason, I went with Harvard students to China 10 years before we actually went there as architects for CCTV. And the statement that I think we make with CCTV is that, and don't forget that CCTV started in 2001, just after 9/11, and concluded only now. The statement is that for the entire world, the outcome of what is happening in China is crucial. And we thought so 10 years ago, and I think that now where it is generally acknowledged that the entire world's economic system is depending on the kind of vigor of the Chinese economy. I think that has become so blatantly true that there is no argument against it anymore, I think. What we have also seen is 10 years of Chinese government that did not can respond to our expectations, because the expectations was that they would reform and that somehow China would become more like us. And I think that was the kind of moment that I kind of suggested with the 89 end of history. We all become the same now. Western liberal democracy becomes the ultimate model. That was still in the air, but that is clearly not going to happen. And I actually showed you the diagram where the kind of blue continues to work in the different bands. But actually, although I don't necessarily want to comment on Chinese politics, I think that the past 10 years were, for many people, very, very important, because they got rights that they never had. There has been a kind of serious effort to create a certain, not only stability, but also certain position for people that simply had no position whatsoever. And we can be disappointed by the kind of fluidity, but on the other hand, I think that on the whole, I would say that it is worth supporting the entire effort, also given the incredible complexity of how to modernize and how to reinvent the politics of a kind of situation where there has been so much authority and where there is now so much pressure on changing that authority. I think that nobody knows the model that they should kind of pursue. So therefore, I would not underestimate those guys in their black suits. And I would not underestimate their intelligence. I would also even not underestimate their imagination. And I think behind the black suits there could be other events. And I think it's actually slightly irritating that we are happy with this kind of black suit as our articulation of what is wrong with them.
Thank you. Are there questions on architecture? Down here.
Both of you have conversed over the role of postmodernist devices in the work of OMA. I would like to know what commentary you can give on the early works, in particular with the villas created in the 90s.
Can you say the first part? I didn't hear.
Both of you have conversed over the role of postmodernist devices in the work of OMA. I would like to know what commentary you can give on the early works, in particular on the villas of the 90s.
On the villas?
Yeah.
On his villas?
Yes.
On his?
Yes.
On your villas?
Are you asking what the role they play?
Yes.
Or what value I assign to them?
I suppose what value?
Basically, I did with Charles and for Charles and the Mencken Center, and recently, and basically, I wrote a book in '95 called Small, Medium, Large, Extra Large, and that was in a way a manifesto. And what it kind of articulated is that architecture is perhaps more defined by its scale than by any other issue. And I also implied that kind of small is as important as large, extra large. And also I proclaimed that I'm at least as interested in small things. So they represent for me the incredibly important category small, which means that you can deal with kind of very personal issues, that you can have a kind of engagement with individual people rather than kind of larger groups, that you can address in a building a kind of incredibly personal condition, and that you can even, and I think that in the beginning I showed my nostalgia as an architect to be connected with good things, that you can do good things. As you know, one of the villa was for a handicapped person, and that was one of those rare occasions where you can actually do with something through architecture that directly influences the destiny of another person. So in all those reasons, it's incredible, for all these reasons, incredibly important. Also as my own personal statements, and deeply regretful that partly the constant escalation of the economy, which also leads on the one hand to kind of more abstract commissions, on the other hand, even in houses introduces a larger and a larger scale, where, for instance, the house in Bordeaux is 400 square meters, and where the last time that we were asked to do a house, we were asked to do a house for 2,000 meters, kind of 5 times as big. That is simply a scale where, for me, it became impossible to really think of it as a house, so where we didn't kind of engage it.
Very good. Patrick?
Thanks for a very stimulating lecture. I have 3 questions. The first one would be, can you reflect about the role of poetry in your research? Second question I have, what is your attitude towards market dynamics? Market dynamics, yeah. we kind of confronted with. And the third is more of a kind of provocation, I would, with respect to your interest in the countryside. Is that really an architectural issue, or isn't all what takes place in the countryside engineering issues? Because it's emptied out of people and subjects.
Well, maybe I can start with the last one. I mean, if you ask about my interest in poetry, I would say that you actually framed it differently. You didn't say interest in poetry, you said research into poetry.
Yeah, I feel that your research contains some poetry and provocation and doses of surrealism. So I wonder if you've reflected about that seeming contradiction. I mean, I think it works in a way as a heuristics, perhaps.
Well, I am constantly kind of baffled by how seriously we are taken, and not only that, but irritated that we are always considered completely serious, because clearly we are not, and we have many different streams of enjoyment and streams of adventure and streams of pleasure that go into every project, and that kind of range from, as you say, provocation to outrage to tenderness to. I mean, we try to of course keep the field and range as wide as possible, because that is one of the terrible features of our profession, that there is always a kind of sense of contraction and entropy, and we have a talent, I think, to keep all those balls in the air, and to also impose on us that insistence on all the other, the importance of the other domains. So when I say that I would like to write a book with a kind of position of combined of Tolstoy and Welbeck, it's obviously an absurd ambition, but I would say that both of them have a very high degree of poetic content, one of explicit and overt poetry, and the second with repressed poetry of ugliness in a certain way. So it is really a crucial issue, and I'm planning to make the countryside book absolutely not only about engineer, but actually about the encounter of those strange previous forms of life that I'm beginning to kind of really explore. I'm sure it's very easy to idealize them. I'm sure there is a lot of grimness even in those kind of pictures I show you, kind of incredible, at least a very dictatorial rhythm of every day, every season, and probably also grinding poverty as one of the incentives to keep going. So I realized that a certain grimness is always part of the story, but I'm willing or interested in finding and exploring, and that is the beauty of writing, of course, that you don't know what you're going to write in advance, but it's a kind of process of exploration and also trying to explore. Maybe there is a certain beauty also in this enormity that is emerging. Maybe there's also a certain beauty about kind of farmers who can take holidays. Maybe there is beauty in considering every crop of salad a kind of single pixel in the market economy that is initiated at the moment of ordering and delivered at the moment of request. So I really cannot tell yet where the needle ends, but somewhere in that whole domain I hope to be able to operate.
Right. I know we're supposed to end around 8, so I think we can have one, possibly 2 more dying questions if they just have to be asked. So the back room.
Many thanks for this interesting lecture. Your ambitions deal with almost all the key issues that we look forward to when it comes to contemporary architecture. But we didn't hear anything about how you feel on sustainable architecture or green architecture. So is there any hidden ambition or some view that you could share on how you feel about those issues?
No, actually I think that sustainability, I think architecture has been one of the few professions that have always thought about sustainability. When I was a student here in the AA in the 60s, 68, 72, sustainability actually was taught. There were kind of people who were very intelligent about it, had enormous experience with it, and told you the ways of doing it. So I don't have a complex about it, and I think that if any profession has both invested and delivered contributions in sustainability, it is the architecture profession. So for that reason, I don't see it as a separate entity or separate discourse or a separate ambition. It is really embedded in everything we do. And therefore, I'm also not interested in breast-beating about it, because I find it crucial but inevitable and key issue. And for instance, my current preoccupation with preservation, I think, is clearly very intimately connected with the issue of preservation. I would say that even this, looking at, let's say, the map of Herodotus in terms of sustainability, I see everywhere on those blue dots where we work, both different attitudes, different motivations, different levels of investment in sustainability, but in almost all cases, a really massive preoccupation with the issue. So it's there in a kind of very intense way, and that's, I'm sure, the way it always will be.
Very good. Right. Well, time for a last burning. Sorry, one more. Okay.
Hi, Rem. Hello. I know that you began your career as a journalist and as a scriptwriter. I'm interested in knowing how that's informed the narrative of your architecture, of your design process, and if you intend to do anything with film now or in the future. Thank you.
I basically was lucky in having an imagination that can engage many different domains. And my father was a writer. Actually, he would have been 100 years a day ago, and a storyteller. I lived in Indonesia for a while, which is a country that constantly tells story on every level, and where everyday life is very close to a story. So I think storytelling is a beautiful gift in a certain way, because it is, of course, the most traditional, oldest, ancient, but once you can apply it to any of the most contemporary conditions, you can use it to kind of reflect about the past, but also kind of project it into the future. So even though very often I'm sick of it, I consider it, of course, a driving force, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, thank you.
Well, Rem, I've never been in this auditorium and heard an architect talk about 4 different subjects and hold the audience breathlessly, listening to his words on things outside architecture, to bring into architecture. And as always, you find amazing correlations in your graphs, which I don't always see, but they always amaze me and delight me and keep me amazed. So thank you very much for giving us a lot of food for thought, for 4 directions that architecture is going to veer in as it careens down the street of history. And we follow, and we enjoy it, and thank you for everything. Rem Koolhaas, thanks.